Chapter 1. The Night Everything Changed. My name is Evelyn, and I discovered my soul on the night I stopped looking for love in all the wrong places. It was 2 a.m. on a rainy Thursday in downtown Seattle, and I was sitting on my apartment floor, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at my phone screen filled with unanswered messages from 3 different men. Jake from the coffee shop, Michael from my yoga class, and David from the dating app I'd sworn I would delete but never did. For the past 5 years, since turning 25, I had been in a constant cycle of dating, relationships, breakups, and more dating. I moved from one man to another, like someone desperately searching for a signal in a dead zone, hoping the next connection would finally make me feel whole. But that night, something inside me broke in the most beautiful way possible. I had just ended another relationship, this time with Connor, a marketing executive who seemed perfect on paper but left me feeling emptier than ever. As I scrolled through potential matches on my phone, a wave of exhaustion hit me that went deeper than my bones. It was soul-deep tiredness, the kind that comes from years of looking for yourself in someone else's eyes. What if, I whispered to my reflection in the black window, what if I just, stopped? The thought terrified me. Stop dating, stop looking for love, stop trying to be chosen. In our culture, especially as a woman approaching 30, this felt like giving up on life itself. But something deeper was calling me, a voice I had been ignoring for years. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I deleted all the dating apps, declined the pending invitations, and chose something I had never chosen before: complete romantic and physical solitude. I didn't know it then, but I was about to discover what Carl Jung meant when he said that everything we deny within ourselves returns as fate. My fate was calling me inward. Chapter 2. The Desert Begins. The first month of what I privately called my romantic sabbatical was brutal. I felt like I had voluntarily entered an emotional desert, and the silence was deafening. Friends didn't understand. My sister Emma, visiting from Vancouver, looked at me with genuine concern. "Evelyn, you're young and beautiful. Why are you hiding from life?" But I wasn't hiding from life. I was diving deeper into it than I ever had before. The problem was, I had no guide for this journey, no map for the territory I was entering. That's when I discovered Dr. Walker Teddy. I had been browsing psychology articles online, trying to understand what was happening to me, when I stumbled across a research paper titled The Psychology of Voluntary Solitude in Women, a study in individuation. The author was Dr. Walker Teddy, a clinical psychologist from Austin, Texas, who specialized in what he called transformational abstinence, the psychological and spiritual changes that occur when women consciously choose periods of romantic and physical solitude. His research, conducted with over 300 women across the United States, Canada, and Australia, showed fascinating patterns. Women who engaged in conscious periods of abstinence reported increased creativity, deeper spiritual awareness, stronger sense of self, and paradoxically more satisfying relationships when they eventually chose to re-engage. I emailed him that very night. To my surprise, Dr. Teddy responded within 24 hours. He was conducting a new study on what he called sacred solitude, and invited me to participate. More importantly, he offered to guide me through what he called the 5 stages of feminine awakening, through silence. "Evelyn," he wrote, "what you're experiencing isn't unusual or pathological. Carl Jung would call it the beginning of individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are, separate from societal expectations and external validation. You're not giving up on love. You're preparing to love from wholeness rather than need." Those words felt like water in my desert. Chapter 3. Understanding the Psychology of Silence. Dr. Teddy and I met via video call every 2 weeks. In our first session, he explained the psychological framework behind what I was experiencing. Carl Jung discovered that humans have a natural process called individuation. He began, his warm Texas accent immediately putting me at ease. It's the psychological process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind to achieve wholeness. For many women, this process requires a period of what Jung called going into the cave, withdrawing from external distractions to meet themselves fully. He shared research from Dr. K. Redfield Jamison at Johns Hopkins University, who found that periods of solitude were often catalysts for creative and spiritual breakthroughs. He mentioned studies from the University of Toronto, showing that women who practiced conscious abstinence for at least 6 months showed increased levels of self-compassion and decreased anxiety around relationships. Think of it this way, Evelyn, Dr. Teddy explained. You've been like someone trying to hear a whisper in a noisy room. The abstinence isn't about rejecting love or sexuality. It's about turning down the external noise so you can finally hear what your soul has been trying to tell you. He introduced me to the concept of the feminine shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected or hidden to be acceptable to others. When a woman stops seeking validation through relationships, she often encounters aspects of herself she's never met. This can be uncomfortable, but it's where real power lies. Dr. Teddy outlined what he called the 5 stages of sacred solitude, based on his research with women from across North America and Australia. Stage 1, the desert months 1 to 2, initial discomfort, social pressure, questioning the decision. Stage 2, the shadow months 3 to 4, encountering repressed aspects of self, dealing with deep emotions. Stage 3, the void months 5 to 6, the darkest period, feeling disconnected from old identity. Stage 4, the awakening months 7 to 9, new understanding emerges, sense of self solidifies. Stage 5, the integration months 10 to 12, wholeness achieved, ready to love from abundance. Most women quit during stage 3, Dr. Teddy warned. That's when the ego panics because it's losing control. But if you can stay with the process, something beautiful emerges. Chapter 4, Entering the Shadow. By month 3, I understood what Dr. Teddy meant about the shadow. Emotions I had been avoiding for years began surfacing with frightening intensity. I remember one particular evening in November, sitting in my favorite coffee shop in Capitol Hill, when a wave of anger hit me so powerfully I had to leave. It wasn't anger at anyone specific. It was rage at all the times I had diminished myself to be more palatable. All the relationships where I had contorted myself into someone else's ideal woman. All the years I had traded my authenticity for approval. Dr. Teddy helped me understand this was normal. The shadow contains not just our rejected negative traits, but also our rejected power, he explained. Many women discovered they've been suppressing their strength, their boundaries, their authentic desires. This anger you're feeling? It's actually your power returning to you. He shared the case of Sarah, a 29-year-old teacher from Melbourne, who had participated in his study. Sarah spent 2 decades being the good girl who never made waves. During her solitude period, she discovered a fierce protector within herself. Someone who could say no, who could demand respect, who could love without losing herself. The anger was her soul's way of reclaiming territory she had given away. I began journaling during this period, and the words that came out surprised me. I wrote about dreams I had abandoned, boundaries I had never set, desires I had never acknowledged. It was like meeting a stranger who lived inside my own skin. The loneliness during this stage was intense. Friends began treating me differently, as if my choice to be single was somehow contagious. Dating invitations stopped coming. I felt invisible in social situations, no longer playing the familiar role of the woman who was always looking for or in a relationship. But Dr. Teddy helped me reframe this isolation. Loneliness and solitude are different things, he said. Loneliness is feeling disconnected from others. Solitude is being connected to yourself. You're not lonely, Evelyn. You're learning to be alone without being lonely. Chapter 5, The Void and the Test. Months 5 and 6 were the darkest period of my journey. Dr. Teddy had warned me about the void, the stage where old identity dies before the new one is fully born. I felt like I was floating in space, untethered from everything that had previously defined me. I wasn't someone's girlfriend. I wasn't actively seeking love. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. The woman who had moved from relationship to relationship seemed like a stranger. During this time, I faced what Dr. Teddy called the tests. Old patterns knocked at my door with surprising persistence. Connor reached out, wanting to reconcile. A charming stranger at a bookstore asked for my number and seemed genuinely disappointed when I politely declined. Friends set up accidental meetings with eligible men. The most difficult test came in the form of James, a writer I met at a poetry reading in February. He was everything I thought I wanted: intelligent, creative, emotionally available. We had an immediate connection, talking for hours about books and philosophy. He asked me out, and every cell in my body wanted to say yes. I almost broke. The pull toward the familiar pattern was so strong. But that night I called Dr. Teddy. "This is the moment," he said gently, "where you discover whether you're committed to your own transformation or just taking a break from relationships. Remember, the goal isn't to avoid love forever. It's to become someone who can love from wholeness rather than need." I declined James's invitation. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but something inside me knew it was necessary. Dr. Teddy shared research from Dr. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas, showing that self-compassion, the ability to be kind to yourself during difficult times, was one of the strongest predictors of psychological well-being. "You're practicing the ultimate act of self-compassion," he told me. "You're choosing your own growth over immediate gratification." Chapter 6. The Awakening Begins. Month 7 brought the first glimmers of something I had never experienced before. A sense of completeness that didn't depend on anyone else. I woke up one morning in early spring and realized I was genuinely happy. Not the fleeting happiness that comes from external validation, but a deep contentment that seemed to radiate from my core. I felt like I was living in my own skin for the first time in years. Dr. Teddy explained this as the beginning of what Jung called self-realization, the process of becoming conscious of your own unique nature and potential. You're not becoming someone new, Evelyn. You're becoming who you always were beneath all the adaptations and people-pleasing. During this stage, I began to notice changes in how others responded to me. Colleagues at my marketing firm started seeking my opinion more often. Friends began coming to me for advice. There was something different about my presence, a quiet confidence that I had never possessed before. I started saying no to things that didn't align with my values, and yes to opportunities that excited me. I signed up for a creative writing class, something I had wanted to do for years but had always sacrificed for relationship activities. I began practicing yoga not as a place to meet men, but as a form of self-care. The dreams Dr. Teddy had mentioned began occurring during this period, vivid symbolic dreams that felt like messages from a deeper part of myself. I dreamed of ancient libraries, of women in flowing robes teaching me forgotten wisdom, of myself as a lighthouse guiding other women through storms. Your unconscious is communicating with you more directly now, Dr. Teddy explained. When we're constantly distracted by external relationships, we miss these inner messages. Solitude creates space for the soul to speak. Chapter 7. Meeting my authentic self. By month 8 I began to understand what mystics meant when they talked about meeting your true self. The woman I discovered through this process was both completely familiar and utterly surprising. She was stronger than I had imagined, more creative than I had allowed myself to be, and more compassionate than I had ever been toward myself. She had clear boundaries, deep intuition, and a sense of purpose that went beyond finding romantic love. I began writing during this period, not just journaling, but actual stories and essays about the feminine experience. Words flowed from me like water from a long dry well. I realized I had been carrying stories inside me for years, stories that had been silenced by the constant noise of seeking external validation. Dr. Teddy shared the case of Rebecca, a 34-year-old artist from Toronto, who discovered her calling as a healer during her solitude period. Rebecca had been so focused on finding a husband that she never noticed her natural gift for helping others process trauma. The silence allowed her to hear what had always been calling her. I began to understand that my period of abstinence wasn't about rejecting sexuality or love. It was about discovering the fullness of who I was beyond these roles. I was learning to love myself with the same intensity I had previously reserved for romantic partners. The longing I felt during this period wasn't for a specific person, but for a life of meaning and purpose. I wanted to use my experience to help other women who might be struggling with the same patterns of seeking themselves in others. Chapter 8. The Integration Challenge. Month 10 brought unexpected challenges. Just as I was feeling solid in my new sense of self, life tested my resolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. James, the writer I had declined months earlier, reappeared. He had been thinking about our conversation, he said, and wanted to explore a friendship that might develop into something more. He had read some of my writing, I had started sharing essays online, and was impressed by my growth. This time, the temptation was different. It wasn't just physical attraction or loneliness driving me. I genuinely liked and respected James, and he seemed to appreciate the woman I was becoming rather than who I used to be. I was confused. Was this the universe testing me, or was this a sign that I was ready to love from the wholeness I had cultivated? Dr. Teddy helped me understand this as part of the integration stage. The goal isn't lifelong celibacy, Evelyn. It's learning to approach relationships from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. The question isn't whether you should date James. The question is, would you be dating him from need or from choice? We worked through what he called the readiness assessment, a series of questions designed to help women determine if they were approaching relationships from wholeness or a habit. Can I be genuinely happy alone, or am I just tolerating solitude? Am I attracted to this person's potential or who they actually are? Would I be devastated if this relationship ended, or would I be sad but fundamentally okay? Am I hoping this person will complete me, or am I excited to share my completeness? Honestly assessing these questions, I realized I wasn't quite ready. I was still hoping James might fill a gap I was only beginning to understand was meant to be filled by my own presence with myself. I explained this to James with a clarity and kindness I had never possessed before. Instead of being hurt, he was impressed by my self-awareness. I've never met a woman who knew herself this well, he said. When you're ready, if you're interested, I'll still be here. Chapter 9. The Return of the Sacred Feminine. Month 11 brought what Dr. Teddy called the return of the sacred feminine, a reconnection with aspects of womanhood that went beyond societal roles and expectations. I began having profound experiences during meditation, not dramatic visions, but deep knowings that seemed to come from ancient wisdom. I felt connected to the long line of women throughout history who had chosen solitude for spiritual development: medieval mystics, Native American medicine women, Eastern spiritual teachers. Dr. Teddy shared research from Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, showing how periods of solitude often reconnected women with what she called their wild woman archetype, the untamed, intuitive, creative aspect of the feminine that civilization often suppresses. You're not just healing your own patterns, Evelyn, Dr. Teddy explained. You're reclaiming something that's been lost in our culture, the understanding that a woman's worth isn't determined by her relationship status, and that solitude can be a sacred practice rather than a failure. I began sharing my story more openly, writing essays about the journey and speaking to women's groups about the transformative power of conscious solitude. The response was overwhelming.
Women from across the country reached out, sharing their own struggles with serial dating, relationship addiction, and the fear of being alone. One woman, Michelle from Calgary, wrote, "Reading your story helped me realize I've been avoiding myself for 15 years. I thought there was something wrong with me for wanting to be alone, but you've shown me it might be the sanest thing I could do."
Another, Susan from Auckland, shared, "I'm on month 4 of my own solitude journey, and reading about your experience in the void helped me understand that the discomfort I'm feeling is actually transformation happening." Chapter 10. The Completion and New Beginning. By month 12, I had completed what Dr. Teddy called the full cycle of sacred solitude. I was no longer the woman who had sat on her apartment floor a year earlier, desperately seeking love through her phone screen. The woman I had become was someone I genuinely enjoyed being with. I had hobbies that fulfilled me, work that felt meaningful, friendships based on authenticity rather than convenience, and most importantly, a relationship with myself that was loving and respectful. Dr. Teddy administered the final assessment of his study. The results showed dramatic changes. My self-compassion scores had increased by 40%. My anxiety around relationships had decreased by 60%. And my sense of personal identity, separate from romantic relationships, had strengthened significantly. "Evelyn," Dr. Teddy said during our final session, "you've achieved something remarkable. You've learned to be your own source of love and validation. This doesn't mean you'll never be in a relationship again. It means that when you do choose to be with someone, it will be from choice rather than need." The most surprising development was that I no longer felt desperate to find love. The anxiety that had driven me from relationship to relationship had completely dissolved. I felt open to love if it came, but complete whether it did or not. Chapter 11. Love from Wholeness. 6 months after completing my year of solitude, love did come, but in a way I had never experienced before. I met David at a bookstore cafe where I was reading poetry on Tuesday evenings. He was a psychology professor visiting from the University of British Columbia, researching the intersection of solitude and creativity. We began talking about Jung's concept of individuation, and I found myself sharing my journey with unusual openness. What was different this time was that I wasn't trying to be anyone other than who I was. I didn't modify my opinions to be more agreeable, didn't hide my period of solitude to seem more normal, didn't present a polished version of myself designed to attract. David was fascinated by my experience. "I've studied the psychology of solitude for years," he said, "but I've never met someone who lived it so consciously." Our relationship developed slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than projection or need. I found myself capable of loving him without losing myself, of maintaining my independence within intimacy, of choosing him daily rather than clinging from fear of being alone. The most remarkable thing was that I no longer needed his love to feel whole. I wanted it, enjoyed it, was grateful for it, but my fundamental sense of self didn't depend on it. This paradoxically made our love stronger, because he was receiving the overflow of my self-love, rather than being expected to fill an empty vessel. Chapter 12. Teaching Others the Way. 2 years after my journey began, I had become something I never expected, a guide for other women seeking their own path to wholeness. I started leading workshops called Sacred Solitude, Finding Yourself Before Finding Love, based on Dr. Teddy's research and my own experience. Women came from across the Pacific Northwest and beyond, drawn by the possibility that there was another way to approach love and relationships. The stories I heard were heartbreakingly familiar. Women who had never been single since high school, who moved from relationship to relationship seeking themselves and others, who were terrified of being alone but exhausted by constantly seeking validation. I taught them what I had learned, that solitude isn't punishment but preparation, that silence isn't emptiness but sacred space, that choosing yourself isn't selfish but necessary. One participant, Maria from Portland, shared her breakthrough. "I realized I had been outsourcing my self-worth to whoever would date me. Taking time to be alone has taught me that I'm actually pretty good company." Another, Jennifer from Vancouver, wrote months later, "My year of solitude was the hardest and most rewarding thing I've ever done. I'm now in a relationship, but it's completely different from anything I've experienced before. I love him from fullness rather than need." Dr. Teddy and I began collaborating on a book about the psychology of conscious solitude for women. Our research had grown to include over 500 participants across North America and Australia, with consistently positive results for women who completed at least 9 months of conscious abstinence from romantic relationships. Conclusion: the whisper that changed everything. As I write this story, 3 years after that night in Seattle, when I first chose silence over noise, I'm amazed by the journey that began with a simple question: what if I just ... stopped? That whisper, barely audible above the noise of my phone notifications and dating anxiety, led me to discover the most important relationship of my life, the one with myself. I learned that when the body goes silent, the soul doesn't just speak, it sings. It tells stories that have been waiting years to be heard, reveals dreams that have been buried under the need for approval, uncovers strength that was always there but had been given away piece by piece to people who were never meant to complete us. The woman I am today, confident, creative, whole, capable of love without desperation, was always inside me. She was just waiting for the space to emerge, waiting for the courage to choose herself over societal expectations, waiting for the understanding that silence isn't emptiness, but the most sacred fullness of all. Carl Jung was right. What we deny within ourselves does return as fate. My fate was to discover that I had been seeking in countless others what could only be found within myself. And in finding it, I didn't lose the capacity for love. I gained the ability to love from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. To the woman reading this who feels the whisper calling her inward, who wonders if there might be another way to live and love, who's tired of seeking herself in someone else's eyes, your soul is calling you home to yourself. The silence you fear might be the sanctuary you've been seeking all along. The journey isn't easy, but it's the most important one you'll ever take. Because when you learn to be your own source of love, validation, and completeness, you don't just transform your own life, you become a lighthouse for other women still lost in the storm of seeking themselves in others. Your soul is whispering. Are you ready to listen?